if you look at teams that are really successful and you study and ask yourself, what is it that makes them so successful? What is a common thing? Let me put it a different way. If you remove something from a team, or if you can introduce a barrier, what's one of the biggest barriers that will stifle creativity and innovation? What I'm hinting at is the word trust, because that word answers all the questions I've just posed. If you study great teams, trust is the key ingredient. Oh, there are others, don't get me wrong, but trust is the key ingredient that you have to have. That if you remove trust, you are guaranteed to slow down innovation. You are guaranteed to slow down change. People ask me all the time, what is the key if you're about to go through a lot of change? Without any hesitation, I will always say it is working on trust first and foremost. It is on building the right levels of trust. And one of the dangers with this is I don't want you to think, and I hopefully started off strong enough to make you clear on this, I don't want you to think we're talking about some soft, jazzy, warm and fuzzy team-building thing. That's why I've been careful to lay out leaders that have proven with financial results that this is hard stuff, not just soft stuff. But I want to give you a model to try to, as we part company, set a context in your mind for memory. As you leave here today, and you, particularly there's going to be some exciting technology stuff you're going to see, and your mind's going to start to get filled with that. But as you leave today, I want to give you a context that will help you retain some of what I'm sharing with you. And the context is by way of a model. And it's a model I refer to as my trust leadership model. And these are the competencies that we need to make sure we build. And let me walk through this with you. At the base, or you could say foundation, is character trust, what I refer to as character trust. I have the language I used earlier. It's who you are. Nothing else matters if people first don't respect who you are. Again, caveat, if you work in a competitive sector that requires innovation. I've worked earlier in my career for companies where I did not respect the boss, right? And the result of that didn't have a lot of impact. You know why? I was a banker, and it was a huge bank, and we didn't have much what? Competition. It was a great bank, but we didn't have much competition back then. I'm just being frank with you. So leadership was not as important in that situation. It just wasn't. So I'm placing the argument that if you live, here's another vernacular. If you live in times of change, that's another way of saying it, competition, innovation, then this is important. Now, here's language that's become popular, emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. That in the last 10 years or so has become phraseology that's used really to describe key character traits that leaders and people of influence need to have. Here's the key word I want to leave you with. It's the word maturity. It's the word maturity. I have a client that I do a lot of coaching for, and he's a former GE guy. In fact, I think we have GE Health. Is GE Health here today? I think there's some GE folks, but this was in before I knew you were coming. But former GE guy, and he talked about at GE how there's a lot of emphasis on developing leaders and maturing them. And he's now running a privately held company, and he's got some leaders. It's a manufacturing industrial setting who are great. They're engineers, and they're great at what they do. But they've been doing it the same way for the last 10 years, and he's trying to get them to innovate. And he's come out and said to these people, and at first they were here's the word, they were very hurt. Because he said to them, I'm going to get you some coaching because I don't think you've matured in certain ways because this company's been so isolated. He said, I value you. I want you to be here long term. But if you don't mature, we're going to have to find other people. So it was a very tough love kind of a thing. And in the first 4 people I met with, every one of them was struggling to define, what does this mature mean? We never had to grow. I'm an expert at this. I've been in engineering for this many years, and tribal knowledge is what they based. You know that term, tribal knowledge? See, they based their value on what I know, not what I can do, not what cooperation I can get. And so this word maturity has become very, very important in terms of our own personal development. And so character has to do with candor, for example. Show me a person with low character, I'll show you a person that can't be candid or can't be believed, so the candor doesn't matter, for example. But let me build a little further and introduce the top of this model. Execution trust, I used that term related to gap earlier. Execution relates to what we do. You might say it's what you do, whereas communication trust relates to what you say. What you say. So here's the key for you and I. How many of you have worked with people that are great and gifted communicators, but you would not trust them to execute as far as you could throw them? Let me see a show of hands. Yeah. And in fact, this happens in many settings. Their tenure is somewhat secured because they're so good at what? Communicating. And they have a lot of credibility as a result of that. The problem is, you get frustrated because you're in a matrix. Let's define matrixed. Matrixed is what I meant earlier when I used the vernacular of begging, right? Matrixed means, that's the academic term that means, you and I have a lot of projects we've got to push forward, right? And the people we need to contribute to the projects don't directly report to us. Or another way of saying it is, we don't have the hire, fire, or the raise, or the evaluation control to scare them or drive fear into them to get them to what? Give us what they should be giving us. Is that a fair description? That's matrixed. So most of us in this room are in a matrixed environment, and what happens is these people drive you nuts. Fair enough? So, here's the problem. A lot of people say to me, which is more important? Let's go to the other side, and I'll answer that question. How many of you work with a person that if they say something, you can take it to the bank? In other words, that's another phrase that says they're good at execution. How many of you work with people like that are great at execution? You can trust they'll do what they say they'll do, but people think they're an utter jerk because when they open their mouth, they destroy people. They're nasty. I could use other adjectives, but I won't. Do you know the kind of people I'm talking about? You could say they're harsh. They're cold. Other descriptors people use is that people never know how they feel about them, you know? So how many of you work with people that are great with execution, but just aren't real good on the communication trust side? How many? Yeah. I do a lot of work in pharma because, and also with attorneys and engineers. You know why? The more highly educated people are, the more they tend to think that tribal knowledge or that knowledge is what they can base their success on, and the less emphasis they put on affecting other people. You with me on this? So I have no doubt that many of you work with very high quality people that are great with execution, but they're struggling with communication. But let's go closer to home. Where are you with this? Where are you with this? My point to you is, in today's age, to be competitive in the workplace, you have got to be excellent at both. So the question becomes, do I need to work at better conveying my messages to penetrate people's paradigms? That's the communication trust side. Do I need to become better at execution so that I can be an and person, to use Steve Krajenko from the GAPS phraseology? You see where I'm going with this? If you study great leaders, great team builders, what you find is they master the character side. They master these two. I didn't say they're perfect, but here's why. If you're more of a left-brain numbers person, I would say that the great leaders would get a B on character trust, on execution trust, on communication trust at least. You know, they're making an A in one, a B in one. But they got to at least be B-level students of life with these. Does that make sense to you? And it's only then that they can build what I call loyalty trust. See, that describes how other people feel about you, your ideas, what you have to say. Loyalty trust. In these leaders I was sharing earlier, Pam Nelson from that tech company, Steve Krajenko from The Gap, Joe Croce from CC's Pizza, Harry Young from now, I didn't tell you the name of his at-risk youth program, it's Youth Entertainment Studios or Yes America. All of them, as well as countless other leaders. Let me add some names that are more celebrity names. Colin Powell, Sam Walton, Gordon Moore, one of the original 7 that founded Intel Corporation. I could go on with the list. If you study, all those people have biographies written about them. You can pick up Colin Powell's autobiography. You can pick up a biography about Gordon Moore. You can pick up these various books, and what you will find as people describe them is that they are at least B students in these. They may not use the language I'm using, but you will hear them talking about how they cared, how they communicated, and how they got the job done, and how you could take their word to the bank, character. See, what I want to make sure in terms of context we give to you is that this is what we're after, the loyalty trust. At the end of the day, that's what makes a difference in a competitive world where innovation is needed, is whether or not you and I have loyalty trust. And I will confess, and I want to challenge you to think about this, I can go back to many points in my career where I waxed and I waned with these. There were times when I ran a small business and I had a lot of debt and we were growing rapidly, heavy growth mode. I became very execution focused. And it was a strategic mistake. And I'll never forget, I had made a bad decision, and I turned to an employee, Tracy, one night. We were working late one night. And Tracy said to me, as we were talking about this problem that resulted from my bad decision, she said to me, Joe, I thought this was going to happen. Tracy was a trusted, key manager in my company, key team member. I viewed her as a buddy. And when she said to me, I thought this was going to happen, I said to her, why didn't you ever tell me? You had plenty of chances in all our team meetings, a lot of our side dialogue, we're in the hallway talking. She looked at me and she said, and we were tired, it's late at night, and she said, well, you know, Joe, you were Mr. Banker, Mr. Planner, Mr. Organized. You know the industry better than me. And then she paused, as if she had something to say, but didn't want to say it. Fortunately, she was tired enough, she didn't care, and she just said, I'll never forget what the words were, Joe, I thought you knew what you were talking about. That's what I fired her. No, I didn't. Had you going, didn't I? I realized then and there, and let me take you back as I close to this. I realized then and there the following. There's a book. I recommend another book to you. Jim Collins' Good to Great. You know it, right? If you haven't, you know, right? If you haven't, it's a bestseller. It's a great book. It's a fundamental book. It's a landmark book. Jim Collins, Good to Great. Good to Great. Yeah, I'll repeat that. Good to Great. Any bookstore has a big red cover, white letters, but Good to Great. Collins, Jim Collins. Years before the book came out, in the Harvard Business Review, he wrote an article that laid out a major point in the book called Level 5 Leadership. In the article, he said, in the book he says too, if you study great leaders, the best ones have tenacity. You know, they get knocked down, but they get back up quickly. That doesn't surprise you, does it? But the second thing he said is one of the reasons I told you about Pam Nelson, Joe Croce, Steve Krajenka, Harry Young. It's all of those people contain a very high level of what Jim Collins said, humility. And I felt so validated when that article came out because for about 5 years prior to that, in my speaking, I was talking about humility, and there were times when people would say, I think in the world we live in now, that's not practical anymore. And people would say that to me. And it was so validating because when you start to have it in the Harvard Business Review, you can start to cite it.